Daniel, we're back for part 2
Okay.
of your testimony.
Yeah.
What would you like to talk about?
Well, I think there's a lot more that could be said on what we've already talked about, but I think we've covered the heart of my story. As I said, what I'm most certain about is the first MDMA treatment and the second MDA treatment up until the girl. Obviously, the stuff related to the girl and her death, by all probability, it must be delusional. Like, how can that be real? I understand that. But also it feels bloody real, as I think is apparent. So that's kind of a level of nuance, or I kind of have to live with the not knowing of that on a day-to-day basis, really. And that's just part of my load to bear, really. But I'm certain that the other stuff happened, and I'm pretty certain that the stuff with the girl happened as well. But there's a lot that I relived that I would say didn't happen. So what I'd like to do in this second half is we dive into my descent into delusion, my subsequent arrest by the police, my transfer to a mental hospital, and then my eventual release and where we find myself now. So that's what I'd like to go through, if that's okay. So the descent into delusion. So I was having these processes, reliving these processes, reliving these memories. But what I think with hindsight, I noticed started to happen is the story in my head kind of ran away with itself, and it started becoming more and more fantastical and less grounded, and it started to have less and less emotional resonance as well. So it descended into a lot of stuff to do with Satanism, a lot of stuff to do with like conspiracy theory, like grandiose conspiracy theory. As I was reliving the memories, I eventually got to the final gestalt, as I called it, where I relived a whole series of events that, funnily enough, happened at a mental hospital when I was about 12 or 13. There was another girl there that died, but I was reliving otherworldly beings. I was reliving basically reptilian beings that were deep under the ground. So really fantastical stuff, really. The way that I make sense of that now is I think it was just another version of the girl's death, but it's just that somehow I looped back around and was having a fantastical version of that, basically. That's how I've been able to kind of make sense of it. I don't know how, but there's something in the mind, and it's happened with other people as well, so it's not just me. As I said before at the start of the other interview, there's like this mechanism that is self-narrating, self-generating of a totally cohesive and sense-making story that can happen directly out of my consciousness. Now, that means that it's a possibility that all of this is some kind of fabrication. I don't believe it is, primarily because of just how viscerally I've relived it through my body, and just like how could I have made all of that up? There's no smoke without fire kind of thinking. But no, I became really delusional, and also I would say the wolf within me started to possess me a bit, and I sort of merged with wolf, and I started spouting ideology around the end of days. I started spouting ideology around a holy war that would involve the hunting down and the crucifying of every paedophile in the world. I started getting more and more extreme in in my stance, basically. And what I would say is, there's the classic saying of like, you've got to be careful when you look into the abyss, because if you're not careful, the abyss is going to look right back into you. And I think that's what's happened to me. And unfortunately, I became, I mean, I didn't hurt anybody, but I did become unsafe, I would say. And obviously, if you have any questions, we can come back to it if that's okay. But basically, it culminated, and there's aspects of this I'm not legally allowed to talk about. So if it feels like I'm omitting, or if you know of other things that happened that I'm not talking about, it's not that I'm not willing to talk about it. It's just that there's certain things that legally I'm not allowed to discuss, because I was arrested, I was prosecuted, and so on. But I'll talk about what I'm allowed to discuss. So I ended up one day along my coastal path where I would go out into the wild and I would swim in the sea and I would do my war dance in nature and I would call out and I would preach the end times prophecy to the world, and I would shout at the top of my voice. I went out one day doing what I would normally do, and I took weapons with me. So I took a spear, a gladius sword, I took a knife, and I took a combat axe with me. And my plan at this stage was there was different motivations that I was kind of aware of, but I think with hindsight, what I was looking to do was to have some kind of situation happen that means that the wolf within me would rise up and possess me. So at this point, I was really delusional. I was really quite unwell, unfortunately, all of this happened over a couple of years. So it was a gradual process of things becoming more and more delusional. But by the end of it, I thought that I could literally turn into a wolf, but that I needed a moment of extreme need in order for him to activate and to possess me fully, just like he did when I was a child, which he didn't. It was just part of the delusions that I started experiencing. So I went out with these weapons. I did a war dance on one beach with these weapons. I went to another place where there was an old fort, basically. So it was in public. It wasn't in town or anything like that, and I wasn't actually planning on hurting anyone. But I was planning on an encounter with the police that would transform me into a wolf, that would mean that I'd be strong enough and powerful enough to start some holy war that would involve the hunting down and the persecuting of every paedophile in the world. So, yeah, it was a bit of a mess, really. It was a bit of a pickle looking back on it. But the police were called. There was a massive standoff for about 4 or 5 hours with the armed police. There was a couple of helicopters. They had a police negotiator there that we negotiated. They tried to negotiate with me. I wasn't really standing down. I didn't have the weapons in my hand. They were on the floor. But I was, talking about conspiracy theories. I was talking about Satanists. I was talking about me turning into a wolf. I was talking about pedophiles running the world. So, and looking back on it, actually, the police were really good. Like from my military experience, I had a rough idea of the police's operating procedures and how they would deal with such a situation, but it didn't feel like it at the time. But with hindsight, the police dealt with it really well, actually. They did end up tasering me 3 times. Something that actually I got out of that was really reassuring, in so much as the pain didn't defeat me. So part of my delusions had included thinking that my mother was some kind of blood sacrificing witch, there was this black goo that was part of the demiurge, and incredible stuff looking back on it, really, that had gradually and incrementally crept in as delusion. But what was I saying before that? What was the point of saying that? But yeah, I'd relived torture. I'd relived being effectively cut open and healing and being cut open again, I'd started to believe that I was the Christ reborn and that I was here to lead this holy crusade in God's name. And you know, it feels ridiculous to say now and a little bit embarrassing, you know. But one of the things when the police tasered me is I kind of showed to myself, if nothing else, that the pain didn't defeat me. So like I was able to fight through the pain. They eventually tasered me in the base of my spine while I was on the floor convulsing, but I was still kind of resisting. So they tasered me in the base of my spine. I felt the electricity shoot up my spine. My head felt like it was exploding with just electricity pulsing through me. I did kind of collapse after that because it just wiped me out. But there was this little feeling of satisfaction of like, I didn't give in to the pain, like I wasn't a coward, if that made sense. It was just something that felt really important at that time. But, you know, when they tasered me, I dropped like a sack of potatoes and I made a weird strangled noise and I fell at a weird angle and I banged my head and, you know, there was a huge response force around this and it was advertised and reported as a mental health incident. And looking back on it, you know, I am grateful to the police for how they dealt with it. You know, they could have easily shot me, which at the time I was kind of open to. Felt very bereft about the state of the world and things in my life. So in some ways, it was a part movement towards death, but that didn't happen, and I'm very grateful for that now. But yeah, so I was arrested. I was taken into custody. I was still having delusions, and at this point, what I was reliving was just pure delusion, to do with, you know, my mother being a witch and this deeper level of grand conspiracy that I believed I'd uncovered. And I was processed. I was sent to Bristol prison for a few weeks. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks. I was actually, because of mental health, being labelled as mental health, because I was talking about satanic ritual abuse, I was talking about Satanists, I was talking about the government being controlled by paedophiles, conspiracy theories such as that, which I don't believe anymore. But yeah, so they put me in isolated or single man prison cell, and it put me in a wing with actually a lot of what I found to be really amazing men. There was a lot of murderers there, actually, but I found a real beauty and a real goodness in these men. There was one who was there because years ago, funnily enough, he'd been in and out of prison for 50 years, or 30 years maybe, but it had all started because his daughter had been raped by a paedophile. He'd gone to confront the paedophile. Things had gotten out of hand and he'd ended up killing the paedophile. And because of that, and then because of other things since, he'd been in and out of prison for 30 years. So that was one of them. Another man had blacked out while he was drinking heavily and he'd killed a friend. And he'd actually come out of a mental institute and was now in prison. Things like that. But, you know, you could just see the goodness of these men, you know, and I really felt a lot of compassion for their stories, and it broke my heart, to be honest, seeing men locked up in such a way, even though they'd done severe things. I was probably regarded as a bit of a character because I was running around in the exercise yard in just a pair of shorts with my top off and barefoot, as that was my thing then. And I was doing pull-ups and dips on the pull-up and dip machine, and I was sort of running around saying, "Come on, lads, keep your spirits up, you know, like it's okay." So I got called Batman a couple of times, which was quite flattering. And I didn't have any problems with any of the other prisoners. I think they left me alone, probably thinking I was a bit crazy. But also being ex-military, I guess I'm not. Again, I don't think I'm like the most imposing man in the world, but I'm not the softest either, if that makes sense. So yeah, so I was left alone, or generally treated with respect and kindness by the other prisoners, actually. And you know, the violence and stuff that you hear about in prison is normally to do with drugs and normally to do with debts surrounding drugs. and normally amongst the younger prison population anyway. So, or it's from prisoners that they hate people that have hurt women or sexual abusers, rapists of women or of children. So actually in prison, if you're like a woman beater, a rapist or a paedophile, you get put into a particular wing that's protected because the other prisoners will actually go for them and attack them, throw kettles of hot water over them with sugar, stab them up, whatever. So there's actually a real code of honour and decency among the prisoners, actually. So I feel I stayed in quite good spirits in prison. I had a good routine going. I got transferred to another prison a bit further down the way. I had a really good routine. I was going to the gym. Had some good friends there. I had some brilliant friends there, actually. And one thing that just struck me is that I really believe, I don't know what the answer is, but I really have come to believe that locking people up is not a humane way to deal with things. And I don't know what the answer is, but I know what it's not. And it's not the system that we have at the moment. It's not focused on rehabilitation at all. And the men are really treated like caged animals in many ways. But anyway, because in prison I was talking about my experiences and I was, sounding a bit loopy, I ended up getting referred to the prison doctor who assessed me, called in doctors from a mental hospital who also assessed me, and they determined that I had psychosis and that I was going to be transferred to hospital. So, yeah, I might just have some tea. So yeah, should we pause there? Is there anything that you want to jump in on, Augustine, or? We covered quite a lot then.
Yeah. I mean, from my experience, interviewing a lot of survivors, I've seen a theme of pedophilia, sometimes with, people of quite low rank, but then also sometimes with people of very high rank. And so I just want to be mindful in terms of, or just trying to understand what you mean by pedophilia and Satanism. You don't believe in the conspiracy of it. I think that's really important because maybe some people tend to make a generality and make it that every person of a certain level is a pedophile or a Satanist.
Yeah.
But I think what's important is that we clearly see that there is a satanic agenda in terms of people who go against moral kind of perceived laws or ways of being, and that there's kind of a favor towards that in certain governments around the world. And in terms of pedophilia, I mean, maybe just in your experience, if these people that, have done these horrendous things to you are able to get away with it, what is that?
Oh man, that's a great question. Not an easy question, but it's a great one. So what I'll start with is, look, when I became unwell, things really became an extreme. So it was like every politician is a paedophile. The police are corrupt and they're all in, or the top policemen are all in on it, and it's all to do with the Masons, and it's all this. And I think what's healthier to take is to be like, look, I think there's some, I think there's some at high levels that, I mean, it's historically proven here in this country, we've, with the care homes and with Jimmy Savile being protected by the establishment and all these kind of things, like there's precedence for it. So I think it's fair to say that it exists, but I don't believe anymore that it exists on the mass level that I thought it did before. And I just think generally, especially if you find yourself in the world of conspiracy, just trying to maintain, because part of the reason I became so unwell is I was just following what felt true, but I wasn't really critically thinking about it. I was just like, yeah, this is true, and I can feel the truth in this, so this must be true. And that was just leading me down this garden path until I ended up in this world of quite extreme world perspectives, really. And what I wish I'd done is I wish I'd held on to more critical thought, and I wish, and something that has come up with the excellent therapy work that I've done, like in hospital. I had an amazing therapist, like in a platonic way. I love her to bits, I got so much respect and appreciation for her, and we did some amazing work together. And one of the things we really talked about is the importance of nuance, and that's kind of one of my, flags in the ground, really, is just maintaining a position of nuance. And I just think when we lose that nuance and it becomes all encompassing, or it becomes an extreme, I think that's a sign that we might be moving away from truth. And you, most of the people we know are so committed to truth, but it's easy to get lost a bit, I think, in the pursuit of it and getting so passionate about these really important topics. And for me, and part of the reason the system doesn't respond maybe in the way that we want is, look, my impression of the judicial system after having passed through it is like this Leviathan, it's this beast, it's this mechanized thing that just, like a meat grinder that processes people. And like, once you're in it, there's that young lady we've talked about recently who's been arrested, and she's going to get processed. Do you know what I mean? There's more mercy in a serial killer than there is in the judicial system. And I know that could probably sound quite extreme, but the system works by its thing. It doesn't always take into account it doesn't always take into account the circumstances that has led to a law being broken. So you're just going to get prosecuted on the law that you've broken without any real consideration of context, really. And it can operate like that, unfortunately. I was reading something the other day about how one of the care home scandals here in the UK, there was children that were being abused at this school or care home, and they were breaking windows and smashing windows, and the police came and arrested them for it when they were smashing windows because they were being sexually abused by the staff, and they were trying to draw attention to it. So it's a symptom of a big and overbearing system that's like a ship trying to turn or a train trying to slow down. It has amazing velocity or amazing weight behind it, and it's a victim of its own size and power and success in a way. And funnily enough, it can lack nuance, or it can lack compassion, or it can lack context at times, unfortunately. So yeah, it's just, if you get caught up in it, there's not much hope with what you're dealing with, if that makes sense. You're not going to be let off, so it's quite scary. It's quite scary, and the police operate in that same system, but it's not all bad. Like, the police that dealt with me very compassionately and very, I think they really dealt with me as fairly as they could. Although I don't agree with people being locked up, the prison officers, there were some real dickheads, but there were some guys that you could tell were really guys and lasses that were trying to do a decent job and look after the prisoners in a humane way. We'll get onto the hospital a bit more, but in the hospital in particular, the positive regard that I felt from everyone. Like, I'm not saying they always achieved what they were aiming to do, but overwhelmingly the staff had a genuine positive regard and wanted to help and wanted to make things better for their patients. So, but they're victims in a way of the system as well. Like, the system can inhibit them from maybe fully expressing that desire by procedures and things in place. And when I was unwell, I would have been like, well, that's because it's satanic, and that's because it's, but I don't know if it's that. I think it may be more, it's just a big cumbersome beast that has been evolving gradually. You know, you look at the mental health system 20 years ago, they were still electrocuting people and, you know, horrendous stuff. So it is evolving. It's just evolving slowly. That was long-winded, but does that answer your...
Yeah, it seems like some of the people are doing the best that they can with what they have.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important that you bring that clarity and nuance.
Yeah.
Just to show that there is some beauty in the world.
Yeah.
There are some beautiful people that are trying to help,
really
even within those environments.
Yeah.
And possibly those experiences with the system has maybe given you back faith.
It really has, yeah. Maybe we'll jump on to the hospital transfer and then we'll come round to that, because really, you know, when I was unwell, so I was still thinking that I was going to be, my plan was to go as deep into the system as I could, and then I knew that when I was in Broadmoor Hospital or something, I would be suffering so much that Wolf would activate, and then finally I'd be able to destroy this satanic system from the inside. So that's what I was kind of thinking originally. Now, when I went to hospital, the transfer was fine. I got there. It was a bit of a rough start, because basically if you go to hospital, they're going to medicate you. And I was really clear, like, I do not want to be medicated. And this is really, there's two complaints I've got with hospital, and this is one of them. The other one is about the belief with the abuse. But I'll do this one now. So when they were going to medicate me, I'd had a conversation with a doctor, and we'd agreed that before any further action was taken, we would have another meeting and discuss the medication and discuss it and so on. What actually happened is that I got kind of one day in the main living area, 15 people turn up, as they tend to when they're going to force medicate you. And they were like, right, come on, you need to go to the extra care unit, which is basically isolation, because we're going to medicate you now. And I was not happy about it. I remember just being stood there with just this array of people. I felt this incredible tingling down my arms. I don't know if I've ever quite felt it like that before, but it was like, it was pure fight energy. You know, I was like, it was on, like, I was like, it's gonna go. But I went with them to the extra care unit. I was in there. I went into the isolation chamber, which is pretty stark. I was in there with a female nurse, and then there was the security guys at the front door, who were very personable and very, you know, I had a good relationship with them by the time I left hospital. But they were saying, like, come on, Daniel, just take the jab, take the injection. We don't want to have to do it the hard way. And I was basically saying, like, look, no, I can't let you do that. I don't agree to it. I don't consent to having this substance put in my body. And if you inject me, you're violating my body. Like, I'm not going to be raped in any way whatsoever, ever fucking again. And I felt almost in this trap of, I morally know it is wrong to force medicate somebody. And and I know that I'm a survivor of rape. Like, it's so fucking wrong for the system to violate me. Like, how is anything good going to come out of that? So I was really there, and I was saying to them, I was like, I'm like morally driven here. Like, I can't let you do this to me. I'm going to have to fight. And we were having this sort of took back, and they were like, "Oh, you can do it stood against the wall, Dan, and you just need to drop your trousers a bit, and it'll be over in a thing." And I was like, "I can't, guys, I can't. We're going to have to do this." And then I experienced, it's not the first time I've seen her, but I experienced, I could see it without seeing it, but almost like a white light up on the corner of the wall. And as I looked at her, I know who it is. It was I would believe it's the spirit of the girl, my angel in a way. And I looked at her, and as I looked at her, just the thoughts that I had were, you don't have to fight. You can take the easy path. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. So I was like, oh God, really? I was like, and it's like, yeah, it's going to be okay. So that message was coming through really clearly. Now, I don't know if that was just psychosis, and that was just the way my psychosis worked, so that I didn't have to fight and get pinned down and be force medicated. But, I was prepared to maim, I was prepared to kill in the defense of myself there. So I would have ended up being sent to somewhere like Broadmoor, which is a maximum security prison, because I was mentally prepared for, like, no, I'm going to just keep fighting and fighting every time they try and medicate me, because it's fucking wrong. But anyway, I saw that light, and I got that messaging, and I was like, okay. So I went into the wall, put my hands on the wall. They came up and they jabbed me in the behind, and they left. And I waited till they left the room. But once they left the room, my God, I did let rip. Do you know what I mean? I was roaring, I was screaming, I was like shouting, I was like calling them rapists and calling them everything under the sun. I was so, a bit of a buzzword these days, but I was so triggered by what had just happened, even though I'd had the information it was going to work out and be okay. In all the ways that I can question myself and be like, did it really happen? Did I make it all up? It's moments like that, like I couldn't make that response up. That was the response of a rape victim being medically violated. Does that make sense? So it was incredibly painful. I had a fury that lasted for several days. I threatened the doctor that had authorized it. I was like, I'm going to gouge your eyes out. I'm going to fucking kill you, like. And I meant it at the time. I was beside myself. And actually, underneath all of this rage and anger was pain and grief and just, yeah, it was difficult, man. Anyway, they kept me in there, and basically what started to happen is the medication started to take effect. And really, the medication I found to be, I was on Clopixel initially, and it was not a good medicine. It's not a good medicine. What it did to me is I don't know if it was the medication or just me being locked up maybe, but I started getting severe anxiety, and I could feel in my experience, it was like a drip coming down from my head into my body, and just this anxiety. And I couldn't get rid of it. I can't remember feeling like that in my life. And it cowed me, and in some ways it broke my spirit for a while. This medication just, my frustration with this is when I went into hospital, I said to them that I was open to psychology, and I would have engaged wholeheartedly with psychology. And I do believe there could have been a way for me through this that could have got me to a more healed state that wouldn't have involved forced medication. I would have engaged sensibly, and I wasn't a threat to anyone. Before they medicated me, I wasn't threatening to harm anyone. It was only as a result of being forced medicated that I became a risk, to people. But yeah, and then as a result of that, I ended up questioning everything. The medication treatment went on for a while. That resulted in the medication and the response that I was getting from the team, because very much what they were saying was that everything was a delusion, initially at least. They were saying everything was a delusion. Daniel's psychotic. And that, I think the impact of the medication, along with just what everyone around me was saying, caused me to question everything. And I was like, I must have made everything up. The anxiety it gave me just accelerated and was exacerbated. And it was horrible. It was really horrible. Like I probably got in quite a weak state, really. You know, like I'm a pretty resourceful, pretty resilient guy, but like just disbelieving what happened to me so completely nearly broke me. And then what happened after that is I just knew that I had to cooperate with them, that in a way with the system, it was a bit like me being a child again. If you don't submit to the system, it will destroy you, or you'll stay locked up forever. So I knew I had to work with the system. And as I did work with the system, I did gradually come to regain trust in it, actually, and to regain trust in the people and so on. But to start with, I was quite cynical of them. And I engaged, I went to the gym 5 times a week. I would do art therapy. I would do the peer support. I do everything. I became really proactively engaged with everything that they offered, and I did start really actively working towards recovery, I suppose. After a while, I was on the admissions ward, and I was taken from the admissions ward to a rehabilitation ward after a few months, and after I'd been sentenced and so on. And on the rehabilitation ward, it was actually way less restrictive. The hospital in many ways is more restrictive than the prison when you're on the admissions ward. And I remember just a lot of the time you would just be walking in circles in the yard, basically, and just nothing to do. Like, boredom in that place is really something else. It's just a level of boredom I've never had to deal with, really. And patience is something that it taught me, like real long-term thinking. I've always been a little bit on the short-term thinking side of things, but like, yeah, long-term thinking, patience, you have to think that to survive. And as well, you have to think, like, I just take it one day at a time. If you think about the next 6 months or the next 6 days even, it can feel overwhelming. So you just think about getting to the end of the next day, end of this day, and get through it, really. But while I was on the meds, I just always, on that particular med, I had this background of anxiety that was just debilitating. So I tried to stay as busy as I could. But on the rehab ward, things started to get better, and I had a really, really good doctor there that I'm so grateful for. Thank you, doctor. If you watch this, you probably will watch this at some point. But he, after some talks and after they were seeing that I was doing very well, I'd become a model patient, really, I'd say. And I was setting a very good example to my peers and so on. So they ended up putting me onto another drug, a much more mild and modern antipsychotic, basically. And with that, the anxiety that I was experiencing pretty much disappeared. There were some mild side effects I had while I was first on the medication, but that's really normal. But just that anxiety going, man, was such a relief. And one of the downsides of the hospital and their reliance on medication is there's people there that are suffering, that have these side effects of medication that they have no escape from, that have to take the meds, and they're always in some degree of suffering because of the medication. Now, I know that for some patients that come in that are totally batshit crazy, they take the meds and then they stabilize and they become okay. Like, I understand the argument that for some patients it's really necessary. But the flip side of that is, once you're on the meds, you're not coming off the meds. And some of the meds can be incredibly detrimental to health, long-term health, and to day-to-day quality of life. you know. But luckily I got put on a really nice medication. So grateful for that. It was oral medication as well, so not injected anymore. I kept swelling up when they were injecting me. So thank God, once I was compliant, they took me off the jabs because they couldn't, because I was swelling up from it. And I got put on oral tablets as well, which was just such a relief for me as well, because the injection every time felt like another violation, you know, even though I was agreeing to it, because I knew if you don't agree, then they get 15 or 20 people, they come and pin you down, they pull your trousers down and they jab you in the arse. So that's a horrible experience to go through. And luckily I didn't go through that, which I'm really glad of, actually. But yeah, so it just kept going. I've made some incredible friends in there, actually. Made some incredible friends in there. I've got some friends that have done probably some very bad things on paper, but these are like some of the most beautiful people I've ever met. Some of the most positive, radiant, light, pure souls that I've ever met. And one of the blind spots I find with the judicial system generally is a lot, not all by any means, but a lot of people that end up committing a crime are often doing it in response to abuse or in response to an insufferable situation. And that just doesn't get taken into account. And it just gets, oh, they've done this because they're psychotic, they're just crazy. There's nothing that's come before this to induce the psychosis. So let's throw the book at them, which feels a bit unfair. But yeah, my two complaints with them was, as I said, medication. And then the other one was just them really not believing me about what I said had happened to me. And I stood after that initial phase of questioning myself and questioning everything and just having I was having panic attacks that were lasting for hours and hours. And this dripping and this heat in my solar plexus that just felt like I was going to die of a heart attack. Like, it was horrendous panic attacks. It's partly, there was the stress of being sentenced and stuff like that. But I think the biggest thing was just being questioned, or just doubting myself so completely about the abuse. And it got better. On the rehab ward, I stood my guns. I was like, look, I was abused. I believe some really bad things happened to me. I believe that girl was killed. So I've tried to stand my ground with it. But there's a bit of a like, in the end, they conceded, look, we can't prove or disprove that if this is true or not. There's a chance it's a long-term psychosis, basically, but they softened in their stance towards me with it, basically, and I found that helpful. I felt more space and I felt a bit more peace as a result of that. So that's that. And then we just start moving towards the end, really. So is there anything you want to touch on from what I've said there? Or?
Yeah, I think it's really beautiful how much perspective you're able to give to the situation. And that shows me that you are quite grounded in your understanding.
Yeah.
And I think that's why they saw you as a model patient.
Yeah.
Simply because you are able to question things.
Yeah.
However, you also have your identity and what you believe to be true, even though you allow yourself to question it, that it might not be true.
Even if I don't want it to be true.
Even if you don't want it to be true, you still stand your ground, because it seems like it's a further abuse to not give the benefit of the doubt to someone that has experienced horrendous abuse. And this is what I wanted to touch on. Having been through the system and becoming a model kind of patient, and then the doctors can say what they think.
Yeah.
But this is your understanding and experience.
I think they said that.
But what would you tell them in terms of, and also being maybe a leader to other people in prison and in the psych ward to become better, to maybe grow, maybe
Right.
to allow whatever
Yeah.
the system is trying to help them with their limited means,
Yeah.
kind of giving them back faith as well into the system.
Yeah.
How would you...
Oh, that's great.
What would you say to them? Like, how can they do things differently? And it doesn't mean that they're going to do it, because they might see you as a mental patient. But I think, in the same way you gave them the benefit of the doubt, it would be great if they gave you the benefit of the doubt.
Got you.
And kind of hear your perspective, your views, what you think. It's like coming out of a flight and saying, what did you think of the flight?
Yeah, got you.
And what would you change?
Yeah.
What would you do differently?
So the main feedback I've got for the doctors is around the survivors of childhood sexual abuse. So I've spoken with a lot of people in these places, and there's a surprisingly high number of people that have been sexually abused as a child, would you believe? There's a lot that have been abused in other ways. So, but especially with childhood sexual abuse, man, like some benefit of the doubt, like, I don't even want to mention names, but even people that I had a really good relationship with and that I really respected could express real doubt about all of the abuse. And that just puts I just think it's such a disservice. And there's a weird blind spot that they've got where if you're doing psychology, they want to work on like present phenomena. So I worked a lot on relationship patterns. I worked on the index offence, what happened it, what surrounded it, what led up to it. But I also worked in psychology on present day relational patterns and how my trauma or how my issues can show up in relationship, which was wonderful, wonderful work that we did. But I've been saying to them, like, look, the reason I got to this place in the first place is because of the childhood trauma. Let's please do some work on that. Like, please. But they're like, well, we think you made it all up, basically, so we don't want to encourage delusions. So they're not doing any trauma work with me. And it's not just me, there's other patients that have got really significant childhood trauma, but there's a weird blind spot where they don't work on it. And then by not working on it, a lot of patients, when they get released, end up relapsing and getting readmitted. But it's, like, as any of us that are in the trauma world or have done any kind of work or research into it, like, trauma is all related to childhood trauma. Addiction is related to childhood trauma. Dr. Gabor Mate talks about. And like, if you want these people to stop reoffending or stop relapsing, you've got to address what's at the root of them even getting put into the hospital in the first place, which is their childhood trauma. And there's this weird just blind spot of like, we're just not going to invest time and energy into that. So I think they need more psychologists, they need more psychology, they need to lay out a clear pathway towards the patients and say, look, if you can engage with psychology, that's going to lead to you being released more quickly. All right? And they're not very good at, my team were very good on the rehab ward, but generally a lot of patients don't get the clarity that they need to formulate a clear plan forward towards exit, which just means they end up staying there for years and years on end. So that's my main feedback for the doctors. That's what they could do better. And especially, again, like survivors of sexual abuse, like, I've had anxiety from just talking about it in this interview. Sometimes after talking about it there with the doctor who's just like, oh yeah, and but then it happened like this, did it? just this weird, analytical, cold, unempathic questioning, I felt suicidal after how they treated me sometimes like that. And it's them just doing their job. But it's painful, man. It's painful. So that's my main feedback for them. And my main feedback to my fellow patients or people that may find themselves in there one day is like, look, you have, there's no two ways about it. I'll say it to the camera. You have to submit to the system. You can't beat it. You can't. A lot of people get locked in a bit of a headbutting contest with the system. And the thing is like, you're never going to beat the system. I had the foresight to understand that. And so I worked with the system. In the beginning, I did it just to get out of there. But as time went on, I did come to see how they are genuinely working for my good and they genuinely want the best for me. And the systems in place are actually fairly good systems all in all. So just what my advice would be is like, work with them, engage in psychology as fully as you can. That will help you get out quicker. It'll help you gain insight. But just don't butt heads with them. You're just going to lose. You're not dealing with a human thing. You're dealing with a system that has protocols in place, and those protocols do not shift for anybody or anything. So you have to submit to it, and that can be a really difficult thing to let something break you or let something control you, and especially if you're traumatized, which a lot of these people are. But that's my advice.
I interviewed a lawyer in Paris just before we jumped to the next part.
Yeah.
And so she helps people in criminal cases, and especially abuse victims.
Yeah.
And or survivors, I would say. But she ended up, before becoming a lawyer, working as in a addict association.
Yeah.
So she said that I think it was 90% of people that were addicts had gone through abuse.
Yeah.
And so, what you just mentioned is so true. And it's crazy that this system would not take it into consideration. The proof is in the pudding.
Yeah.
If you don't bring healing to those wounds, you're going to enable more and more people who are going to do criminal things.
Yes.
Because they're not being heard. It doesn't mean that it is good to do those criminal things. I'm not saying that in any way. But this is ultimately what will happen. Because if someone is not heard, is not believed, they're going to, scream for help in a different way. And that different way for you ended up being, facing the police. And ending up in this system, which actually maybe helped you ultimately.
It has. Yeah, I never thought I'd say that, or I didn't back then, but it has helped me. Yeah, the problem is two-pronged, because on one hand, a lot of the male patients are very avoidant. They're very avoidant to talking about their issues. So that's part of my wish for them, is like, look, guys, you're going to have to talk about your stuff. You're going to have to talk about your index offense. You're going to have to do the difficult work of psychology. If for no other reason than it gets you out of there quicker. Okay? But to be fair to the system, it's very difficult, because there's a lot of people that just don't engage in psychology. And psychology's the complement to the medication, really. So that's to give a fair shake to the system. That's something they have to contend with. A lot of very avoidant people that won't engage with psychology. But to be fair to the patients, I don't know if the system's really getting to the root of the problems, as we've just discussed, and I really think they need to.
And do you think there would be an opening for an outside offering if the system themselves don't have it in them? In the same way that there's pastoral care, or Was there that in the system that you were in?
In order for there to be something from the outside. So, for example, I think a somatic therapist coming in would do wonders for people with trauma, for example. So if they're qualified, if they're insured, if they're proof driven, then they may be open to it. But really, I see it that they would need an injection of cash, and they would need extra resources to be spent on psychologists, particularly psychologists that specialize in childhood trauma. And I think particularly good somatic therapists, I think, would do wonders, because a lot of the time with somatics, you don't even have to talk. It's body work, and it can still process trauma.
Yeah.
So that's that. Should we move on to the close?
Yeah.
So while I was in there, there was a spirituality group that started, and I was a member of that. And there was a few books that I read. The Undreaming Wetiko book. I forgot the author's name, but that helped me get some clarity on certain things to do with God and to do with the devil, or to do with what I had seen as the demiurge, which I believe was the devil incarnate. So it helped me put some things into order with good and evil and whatever that I'd been wrestling with. And then with the spirituality group, the thing that I found myself being drawn to, and he talked about it in the Wetiko book, actually, of just the way that you defeat Wetiko, which is this mind virus that he says is the source of evil in the world, this human shadow, basically. But the way you defeat that is through becoming conscious, through becoming light, or being Christ-like in a way. So forgiveness and those kind of things. So I wasn't a Christian at that time, but I did find myself really drawn towards forgiveness. And I realized if there was a wisdom in everything that had happened, it was so the boil could be lanced, that was all of the pain, all of the grief, all of the unforgiveness that I had felt and held on to, that probably would have killed me as a cancer or something one day. So that had been purged, and that had been dealt with to a large extent, and with help. But yeah, so I started a journey with forgiveness, really. And to go back, how I used to be with forgiveness was, if I forgive, I'm enabling the abuse. If I forgive, I'm letting my boundaries down, and it means that they still have access to me. If I forgive, I'm betraying myself. If I forgive, I'm betraying the girl or other children that were abused alongside me. If I forgive, I'm basically enabling, or it was that kind of thing. And I could get very heated about, like, no, forgiveness for day to day, like you step on my foot or you drink my tea, then of course I can forgive you for that, and easily and readily. But if you're going to rape a child, that's the most heinous, hideous, evil thing it's possible for a human being to do. It's the ultimate evil. I had at one point come up in my recollections towards the beginning, I had the oldest sacred law come up to me, which was that the blood of the innocent shall not be defiled. So to break that sacred law, as I understood it, was like the ultimate sin. And I still believe that to some extent. Like, our children are sacred. We're sacred, but our children are the most sacred things on this earth, and deserve protection and honouring and cherishing. So to violate that, my God, it's just beyond the pale. So I had a lot of work to do with forgiveness, and the main practice that I've had is really understanding that in, say, Christ's ideology or in Christ's wisdom, to not forgive is to commit a sin. Now, I'm not necessarily all on top of the sin thing and whatever, but I could just follow it enough that I was like, I think I get what he's saying here. Like, and what I've found is that by going through this journey of forgiveness, I've let go of a lot, and I feel a lot lighter. I feel a lot cleaner. I've let go of a lot of resentment, and actually I can still uphold my boundaries. Like, my family are cut off. I'm never letting them close again. You know, they've betrayed me, and that's regrettable, but I will honour the child that I once was, and I will not permit him to be dishonoured by those who are supposed to protect him. So, but I can forgive them as well. I can forgive them. And the practice that I've had is, so first of all, I had to come to the conscious recognition that to forgive is the right thing to do, and that it wouldn't disempower me, or it wouldn't say the abuse was okay or enable the abuse. I had to come to realise that through my own process. And then the main practice was literally like, once I've recognised that, okay, I'm going to forgive. So it might be, okay, I'm going to forgive you, Bob, or whoever their name may be. And then if I feel resentment or if I feel difficulty with that, I ask for help from God. And I say, God, grant me your grace, grant me your forgiveness to help me forgive the unforgivable. And as I keep doing that, and layer after layer comes up, and I say, okay, I forgive you, or help me forgive them, Lord, because I can't forgive them on my own. So I need your help to supplement my forgiveness, so there's enough forgiveness for them, and help me forgive myself, and so on and so on. And, you know, I'd say a combination of the psychology work I've done, you know, I've had a lot of support, you know, the team on the rehabilitate, well, all of it actually. The team on the admissions ward I've met some wonderful people, but built really good relationships with the team on the rehabilitation ward. They really were in my corner. They really believe in me. I think they've got a lot of positive regard for me. The doctor, the other doctor, the nurses, and then my fellow patients. You know, there's been a lot of support actually that I've gotten. So that, along with the spirituality group, along coming into forgiveness, has just rounded everything off. And everything as I move towards my discharge, obviously I'm discharged now, but there was just this feeling of everything coming together. Everything was integrating. Everything was like falling into place. And I really felt like I was being held by something greater than myself. And I think just me understanding that for me not to forgive, that was totally understandable and relatable, but nevertheless, it wasn't doing me any favors. And if I'd been able to forgive sooner, I probably wouldn't have got myself in such a sticky situation in the first place. So I've got to take responsibility for that myself. But yeah, so all of that has led to me, I think, being in a pretty good place now, relatively speaking. And I feel quite proud of the work that I've done. I feel very hopeful for the future. I really want to share my story and try and help others, try and inspire other men to share their stories with the world, to move towards healing, to talk about their stories, to talk about their pain, to find solace and comfort with their fellow man, with their brothers. And sisters too, of course. But yeah, no, it's been a hell of a journey. It's only beginning in some ways, but I feel very grateful and I feel very blessed actually now, and I'm free of the incredible anger and rage, and I know I'm not emotionally bypassing it. That was my fear with forgiveness, that I'm just emotionally bypassing the anger, because I'm a big believer in the wisdom of the emotions, and that there was a real wisdom in my anger, and there was. Anger is a restorative emotion. A boundary gets crossed, gets violated, you get anger, you get rage in response to restore that boundary. Carla McLaren, The Language of Emotions, talks about it beautifully. So I don't want to make anger wrong, but my anger did become possessed and did become a beast of its own, and I did become something I'm not proud of. Understandably, I think, in light of what it was I suffered and in light of what it was that I went through, but I'm still a bit disappointed that it got to that point, but I'm also glad I'm where I am now, that I feel like it's come full circle. So that's me.
What is your offering today?
My offering.
Yeah, is there something that you touched on, wanting to help
Oh
men?
gosh.
Is there something specific that you have in mind that, how can you support?
I'm going to have another offering that's called Leonard. It's leonard.com, so Daniel spelt backwards, daniel.com. And that's going to be based around men's work specifically. But there's going to be this channel, Survivor's Story, sharing stories. Please stay tuned and hear from other amazing survivors and their stories and their journeys. That's going to be my main offering, really, is just helping other survivors find their voice and speak out and share it with the world, and trying to raise awareness, not just awareness of the issue, but awareness of the process that somebody needs to undergo to heal and to become more whole after experiencing the worst. It's just the worst. So I guess I would hope to inspire others in that way.
I mean, I'm so encouraged by your testimony and also knowing you since a year or two.
A couple of years now.
And seeing you today and the transformation in you. I mean, the first time I met you, I can see the honesty, I can see the authenticity, and I was very touched by that. Even before you went into the hospital, I can see that there were certain other things that you were working with. The frustration, the anger being one of them, which, like you rightly said, can take over a person if you don't deal with it. But I've been extremely moved by how in these last few years you've made a journey towards forgiveness and love, and I think that's absolutely beautiful.
Thank you, Augustine.
And I'm very honored to have witnessed it as well. So thank you.
I'll just say a little bit more if that's okay, because with love you just reminded me. So to forgive and to love them if you can. And it's not easy, and even you just say it and you can't mean it, you can't even feel it. But in doing so, it does set you free. It does set you free. And it allows you to let go of what you've been carrying, what you've been holding on to. I felt I had to hold on to it to honour the girl that died, to honour the other children that were abused. But yeah, practice that. I forgive you. Practice that. The thing with I forgive you and I love you, actually, which is really important, is I would say before you do that, actually, and this is really good, we're talking about it, is you need to have boundaries in place first, and you need to be comfortable. You need to be confident with your boundaries. When your boundaries are in place and they're secure, then you can start thinking about forgiveness. But if you go into forgiveness too soon, it can let them back in. It can lead you to betray yourself. So get those boundaries in place first for protection and for safety. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then from that place of safety, then it can be safe to forgive. Then it can be safe to love them and to set yourself free.
And forgiveness can be done from a distance.
Yes, from a distance.
It doesn't need to be
from a very safe distance.
Going to see the abuser.
Don't. I'm never going to see them again.
It's a decision in the heart.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a prayer into the world.
Yeah.
Letting go of what no longer is of service to our being.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Bless you, Augustine. Thank you for the interview.
God bless you.